Hey everyone, super excited to get started on our med school application timeline event. Really looking forward to it. While we're waiting for folks to trickle in, definitely jump in and sign up for the giveaway. We're giving out another free spot in our medical school application boot camp. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started and turn the time over to our expert instructor, Krysta. Krysta, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nick. Well, hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you this evening or afternoon, depending on where you're at, for Med School Week here on Leland. So here on the screen, you'll see a QR code. You can feel free to go ahead and sign up for Leland so you can continue to receive free resources, stay in the loop with everything that's going on, including with the boot camp that Nick had mentioned. I think Amanda is also sharing some links in the chat, which will be super helpful. So we've already had a couple of really great workshops throughout Med School Week. We've got a couple more coming up that are really kind of centered on the MCAT, on your personal statement, and then actually connecting with a current med student who's ready to answer all your questions tomorrow evening. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the med school application process and just kind of what to expect. So as we get started, I wanted to tell you all a little bit about me. Again, my name is Krysta. I use she, her pronouns. I have been working in the coaching space for the last 5 years. So, my full time job during the day is I work in a large Midwest university in a pre med and science space, working with students on graduate and professional school applications, career searches, resumes, all of that kind of stuff. I joined Leland in September of last year, and it's been so much fun to get to connect with folks, to meet people from all over the world, and to get to help them to work towards their goals. So I'd be really excited to work with those of you who might be interested in chatting after today's event. Amanda has helpfully shared my link in the chat so that you can go ahead and check it out and schedule a 15-minute free intro call if you're interested in doing that. I'm also offering a discount on my coaching packages tonight. So we'll make sure to get you the code for that at the end of the session. So I first wanted to start with the timeline. So as we're thinking about these med school applications, there's so much to consider, right? And so I've built this timeline kind of based on those of you who would be applying in this application cycle. So if you're here and you're planning ahead of the game, you are planning to apply maybe in the 2026 or 2027 cycle, you'll just want to adjust these dates accordingly in your brain. So we're sort of in this spring 2025 space, although I don't know where y'all live, but I live in Michigan and it is snowing buckets outside. Sure doesn't feel like spring. But that's kind of where we are in terms of the timeline. So this time of year, we're really starting to get serious about making sure that we've at least got those dates scheduled for our MCAT, that we've started to work on our personal statement and our activities section. So we're starting to put some of those drafts together ahead of the May opening application date. So both the AMCAS and the AMCAS will open at the beginning of May, and that's when primary application submission will begin. We'll start to see secondary applications come through in about July, and then interviews will begin as early as August, and we'll run through March of the following year. So I want to center us in a little bit more on a timeline that we can kind of wrap our heads around, right? Today, we're really going to be focusing on what do those timelines look like for your letters of recommendation, your personal statement, and your activity section. So this month, what I really want you to focus on is securing your letters of recommendation. So if you haven't already, I'd encourage you to reach out to those folks who you would want to write your letters. Ideally, this is going to be a science faculty member and some other folks who have supervised you, right? Send those initial emails, get those initial commitments. We then want to begin brainstorming for our personal statement and activity section. So that's kind of the month of February. February, we're just doing a lot of prep. In March, we're going to be drafting our statements, our activity sections, and this is also where we're going to start thinking about our school list, right? Thinking about where we might want to be geographically, what programs really align with our goals and our values, which are the places that we would be excited to be for at least 4 years, if not longer, if we stay for residency or fellowships or things like that. In April and May, we're really wanting to start to finalize our materials, make sure that our personal statement is ready to go so that we can send those documents over to our letter writers, because those can really help to inform their process as they're getting those recommendations ready. And so then May through July is where things get really exciting. So in just a minute here, we're going to go step by step through what you should be thinking about for that personal statement and activity section. But to just kind of give you a very brief timeline, again, that application opens at the very beginning of May. The AMCAS application this year is opening on May 1st. The ACOMAS application is opening on May 5th. And so you'll have the whole month of May to fill out those applications. And the reason that I say that is that the AMCAS in particular, the very first day you can hit the submit button isn't until May 28th. So we've still got lots of time to continue finalizing your documents, to even get you in that very first round of applicants, right? So this is not everything needs to be ready on May 1 because I can hit the button then. This is by May 1, we should be well on our way to finalizing things if at all possible. But again, that application process can be really flexible based on your needs, especially when it comes to taking into consideration your MCAT and things like that. So in the months of May and June, we're filling out that application. We're sending our letter writers some reminders either through the system or in an email. We're requesting our transcripts. Many of your schools may have specific information on their registrar website about how you want to go about requesting those. And then, as I mentioned, that first AMCAS submission can take place on May 28th. We don't start to see those applications get kicked out to the med schools until about mid-June. So again, when I tell you that things don't need to be ready to go at the drop of a hat on May 1, I really do mean it. We've got a little bit of wiggle room. Schools won't start to see those applications until June. So we do have a little bit of wiggle room. Secondaries will begin in July. And then again, from there, we're going to move on to interviews and things like that. Brianna said, so why does it say open May 1? That's confusing because I was under the impression that I need to submit May 1 to be in the first pool of applications. Yep, really frustrating. If you double check the AMCAS website, you'll see again, it opens May 1, gives you lots of time to fill it out. You can go ahead and hit that button on May 28th. The number one thing I want you to be remembering as you're putting together your materials is that med schools are looking for the best applicants, not just the people who apply first, right? Think about if you were to go into an office, right? Like, do you want the person to handle your situation who is best trained to do that? Or do you want somebody who just happened to turn in their application super early, even though they had no experience, right? So we really want to make sure that we're taking into consideration our well-being, MCAT timing, all of those different factors that might play a role in pushing back your timeline and making sure that you're applying when you're your best applicant. So it can also be really helpful to be thinking about how can we connect with other folks who can help us to better understand the process, to help work through it together, right? Because ultimately this can be a shared experience when it's a really hard experience. So I'm going to kick things over to Nick to talk about the bootcamp, which does a lot of just that.
I'm excited to share that one person here on the event today is going to receive a free admission to our medical school application bootcamp. This is a fantastic program for you to get the foundation of what you need to succeed in med school applications. So we'll dive really deep on, I'm seeing lots of questions in the chat on letters of rec. We have a full session on letters of recommendation, the strategy, all of the specific ins and outs of that. And Krysta, if you could jump to the next slide, you'll see the full course outline here. You'll be able to get all of those questions answered and more in live sessions with amazing instructors, top coaches who will get your questions answered and help you with the application. And beyond that, you not only get access to all of these amazing workshop sessions that will guide you through the process of filling out your application. But Krysta, if you could jump to the next slide, you'll also get a community of folks who are all going through the same process together, which of course is great for moral support, but you can also get feedback from others who are going through this. You'll have access to Leland Plus, which is a content library of admissions prep material for med school. For any of you who end up in an interview process, through your application, you'll also get included a 45-minute mock interview. So all of this, if you were to just buy it one-off on Leland, would cost almost $2,000. But for everyone who joins the giveaway, even if you don't win, you'll actually get it for $5.99 here through that giveaway. So we'll be sending out, my coworker Andrew will send you a discount code for $5.99 if you're not the winner, and we will announce the winner. Krysta will announce the winner here at the end of this event. So definitely stay on and sign up for the giveaway. Krysta, if you could jump to the next slide, we'll see that link again. It's a bit.ly/winmedschool. Sign up. We'd love to have you in the program. It's a fantastic community and way to get your applications all set, and would love to have you there with us. And without further ado, we'll turn it back over to Krysta.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. What an exciting opportunity to, as you said, get to connect with professionals who can provide some guidance and folks who are going through the process, build that community, all of that kind of stuff. We love that. Awesome. So now I want to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty of each of the components of the application. But before we do that, I want us to really be centering our conversation around this list of competencies. So each year, the American Association of Medical Colleges, so the AAMC, which is the group that puts out the MD application, the AMCAS application, they put together this list of competencies that they're looking for in incoming medical students. And ultimately, this serves as a job description of sorts, right? That really allows us to think about what are the skills that folks are looking for as they're evaluating applications, right? And so my strategy when working with applicants has always been to build our applications around these competencies, right? If they're saying these are the skills that we want you to have, a really compelling argument for admission is here's how I know I have each of these skills that you've highlighted, right? And so we have a really great opportunity to be able to talk about these competencies in our personal statements, to talk about them in our activity section, to get our letter writers to talk about them. And so I really want to keep those things in mind as we're talking through each of these next couple points. So I know if you came to the kickoff last night, you heard me talk about the competencies. I wasn't kidding when I said that it was my entire personality. This is what I have folks focus on as we're putting together your med school applications. So again, we're going to focus on these three components of the application this evening. So we've got our personal statement, our activities descriptions, and our letters of recommendation. So we'll kick things off with the personal statement. I know in last night's kickoff, we asked folks, what are you most nervous about in the application process? And some folks definitely said the MCAT, but it was a fairly even split between the MCAT and the personal statement, right? I think it's so hard and scary to talk about ourselves, right? To have to brag about ourselves and explain our experiences in a meaningful way to somebody that has no context for what we've done or who we are. And so I first want to start with just the logistics of your personal statement, right? So your personal statement needs to be 5,300 characters, and that's applicable for both the AMCAS application and the AMCAS application. So for both your MD and your DO schools. For the AMCAS application, we do want to make sure that we include some of those specifics about osteopathic medicine, right? So typically what I do when I'm working with candidates is that we'll spend some time constructing that statement, without considering those things unless you're only applying DO, right? But a lot of those things will come through naturally, right? Your ability to build relationships with patients, taking into consideration people's mental and emotional well-being as you're caring for them physically as well, right? So kind of the idea of osteopathic medicine is that all of those things are related, right? And so we want to make sure that we're using some of that specific language. So typically we'll write an initial draft, and then when we go to apply to DO schools, we'll adapt a little bit, incorporate some of that language around osteopathic medicine, that mind, body, spirit connection, things like that. So as we're thinking about our basic format, again, getting back to the logistical piece, your intro paragraph will serve as an anecdote. This will usually give us an idea of where your interest in medicine came from. Could be a personal situation, could be something you observed in the hospital, could be something you saw another physician demonstrate in their work that you know you want to embody in your own practice eventually too. And then we're going to end that intro with a thesis statement. So really kind of highlighting what are the skills and competencies you're going to be highlighting throughout the rest of the paper. We've then got those 2 to 3 body paragraphs where we're going to assign each one of them a competency. We'll introduce that competency at the beginning of the paragraph, launch into a really specific story from our clinical or research or volunteer experiences or student leadership work that we know really highlight that competency. And then at the end of the paragraph, we're going to tie that back to how we would use that skill or competency as a physician. And then finally, we're going to put a conclusion on it, kind of reiterate your thesis, reiterate your commitment to the field of medicine. And that's it. So let's go ahead and talk more about what your statement needs to do while keeping in all of those logistics, right? So it should answer the question, why do you want to be a physician? So as we're thinking about that, again, we want to be really specific. We want to pull together some stories that really highlight why this intersection of medicine and leadership is aligned with our skill set and our interests. And again, we're thinking about this being a series of narratives or stories that really demonstrate your skills in a meaningful way, right? Again, sort of this idea of showing instead of telling. So we want to make sure that we're making meaning of each of our experiences. When we talk about our research or we talk about our clinical work, I don't want it to sound like your resume. I want it to sound like a story that you're sharing that again really highlights your skill set. As you're doing this, I want to make sure that you're getting multiple opinions, right? Have a friend read it, have a mentor read it, have a coach read it, but we also want to make sure that we're maintaining our voice. We want to address any discrepancies in your application. So if you had a semester where maybe things just didn't go as planned, that's definitely something that we can address in the personal statement. And then again, this is a great communication sample for school. So we want to make sure that we're writing well and proofreading. Got a couple of questions in the chat about, is it a thing to have too much experience? Most of y'all have plenty of experience. Certainly, we're not going to get it all into the personal statement. So that's why we're really careful about how we use our space in terms of activities, personal statement, reflection from letter of recommendation writers, right? And then remember, like, this is just to kind of get through that first part of the application. You're going to have secondaries, you're going to have interviews, you're going to have the opportunity to send update letters. There is still time to share more information with committees. What is an example of a thesis statement for this without coming across as too cocky? So typically your thesis statement is going to follow along the lines of, as a future physician, I hope to embody, skills that I saw in the physician that I shadowed with, including empathy, an ability to think critically and to collaborate in a team setting, right? So again, just kind of introducing what those things are going to be. I would say, again, like working with a coach to kind of do that humility check, but y'all have done so much amazing work, right? It's okay to say that. And in fact, you should. Should our personal statement follow a storyline in regards to literary components of kind of show? It doesn't need to be super creative. This was something I was talking about with a former admissions counselor who now works in my office just today, actually, about how those essays where you're making a metaphor about how you're blooming like a flower, or that as a phlebotomy technician, you're kind of like a vampire. These are real things that people write. No, the best bet is just to share your story and highlight your skill set in a meaningful way. How much is too personal? Great question. So my rule of thumb is, if you wouldn't want to talk about it more in an interview, don't put it in your personal statement, right? Anything you put in this statement becomes fair game for the rest of the application process. And while some schools do what we would call a closed file interview, there is the potential that that these things can come up in an interview, right? So if there was a personal situation that was tough for you, medically or emotionally or whatever it is, and you don't feel comfortable talking about it with a stranger, don't put it in your personal statement. Do you think mentioning lower GPA in personal statement, if you mention the mistakes you made to get that lower GPA and how you overcame it? Yes. And so this is like significantly lower, right? So if you got a 3.5 in a science class, I'm not worried about that, right? If you had a semester where you average C's across the board, when you're usually, scoring in like the A and B range, or whatever the school equivalent of that is. I know that some folks will use, just GPA or things like that. Every institution is a little bit different. If it's a drastic difference from your normal academic performance, we can absolutely address that in your personal statement. And then, yes, we'll make sure to kind of highlight how we overcame that challenge, how we would use these newfound skills as we're entering med school. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and keep rolling because I want to make sure that we're getting to all the different pieces here. I'm going to try to grab as many questions out of the chat as I can, I promise. So I want to move on to our activity section. And so when we're thinking about logistics for this is the biggest difference really between the AMCAS and the AMCAS application, is in the way that they logistically handle the activity section. So in the AMCAS application, we get 15 experiences to talk about. And then from those 15, we get to select 3 activity that are the most meaningful. So these are three that really stand out to you, that really help to develop your experience as a clinician. They've helped you to develop the competencies you would want to use in your own practice. There's no right answer for these. Really, we want you to be taking into consideration, again, like where did you really develop those skills? Because if you're able to talk about why it was meaningful to you, that's really going to come across in your application. For the AMCAS, you're going to get 700 characters to talk about each of those, and then you'll get an additional 1,325 for your most meaningful. So your three most meaningful, you'll end up having a total of 2,025 words, or characters, sorry, 2,025 characters, but they are separated. So typically what I'll have folks do is that they'll briefly explain in that 700 characters kind of what they did for their most meaningful, and then we'll use that 1,325 to tell a story and really demonstrate a competency. For the AMCAS application, we get an unlimited number of experiences. And so one of the tips that I like to give folks is, so for the AMCAS application, since we have a little bit more space in terms of character count, but we're limited on the number of experiences, something we might do would be, let's say that if there was a club or organization that you were a part of, and 1 year you were the president and 1 year you were the secretary, perhaps in your AMCAS application, we combine those. But then in the AMCAS application, we could split those out because then we do have only 600 characters to talk about them, which I know doesn't seem like a lot, but trust me, as we're splitting hairs at the end, that 100 character difference really can be tough. So even with the AMCAS and the unlimited experiences, I'm recommending that we typically go no more than like 20 to 25. We want to make sure that we're thinking about quality in our application as opposed to quantity. So when we're writing our activities descriptions, there is a formula that we can use. And so I want you to kind of be thinking about these 3 points. So the first thing is I want you to briefly talk about what you did, right? Most institutions are going to have an understanding of what a medical scribe does, of what an undergraduate research assistant does. But we want to at least give them a little bit of an idea of what that entailed for us. Where we really want to focus our energy is highlighting those competencies that you gained and what you learned from that experience, right? This is the part that's unique to you, unique to your lens. And so that's what schools really want to understand about your experiences. And then finally, we want to demonstrate how we would use that skill in your practice. All right, so we've got a couple of questions in the chat I want to go ahead and grab. Do you think we should do all 15? If, again, quality over quantity, right? So we want to make sure that we can, highlight the things that are most important. I got a 2.3 GPA, completed 80 credits. This is something that I'd say, like, let's talk about that in a coaching meeting. Even if you're able to grab like a free 15-minute slot with somebody to kind of talk through and then start talking through application strategy. This is where having a coach comes in really helpful, right? Because you can come to them with your really unique and nuanced situation, as opposed to going to Reddit, which is something we want to avoid throughout the application process. Is it okay to not have 15 activities? Again, quality over quantity. Maybe an odd question, but does taking care of an elderly sick family member count as an activity? I don't think we'll include it as an activity. Would need to know a little bit more. And so again, this is a great space to be able to connect with a coach, to talk a little bit more about that process, but it is something I would say we could talk about in your personal statement. Thank you, Amanda, for dropping the link in there. Does the order of the activity sections matter? I think when we're reading anything, right, we start to zone out towards the end. So while there's no like scientifically based evidence to say that it's better to put your most meaningful experiences at the top or the ones you really want them to pay attention to the most, I think just knowing sort of human instinct, right? They're getting paid to read your application, so they're going to read the whole thing. But certainly it can be helpful to maybe move those things to the top, right? I don't know about y'all, but like if I'm reading through a long paper, I'm definitely paying attention more to the things that come first. Last question on activities. How many hours should you spend on something in order to include it as an activity? So I would say that if it's something that's reoccurring, that's what I would sort of take into consideration, right? If you volunteered at a homeless shelter once, in a soup kitchen, maybe you went like 2 to 3 times. That's maybe not something I would include just because we don't have a lot of space to talk about the competencies that you developed there. But if you went and you tutored a student, but maybe it was just a couple times a semester, maybe that's something where you've really had the chance to kind of understand how explaining complex concepts to somebody who doesn't have the same scientific understanding or mathematical understanding, right? Like perhaps that's something that's more worth talking about. So instead of thinking about hours, I might have you instead think about what was the competency that I gained? What did I take away from this experience, right? How would I talk about it to the admissions committee? All right, I know I'm flying through things. I'm trying to keep us as close to 6:30 as possible. If we run a couple minutes over, I'm happy to take questions if folks are able to stick around. But let's get to those letters of recommendation. So in the application systems, you can have anywhere from 3 to 7 letters. Your letters of recommendation can be directly uploaded to the application systems. Oh no. Okay, it sounds like maybe I froze. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and rewind and go back to the letters of recommendation. I've turned my camera off, and so I think that maybe my internet's unstable because of the snowstorm. So as we're thinking about our letters of recommendation, we can have up to 7 letters. We need a minimum of 3. And so for this, we want to make sure again that we're taking into consideration that quality over quantity piece. And so really making sure that every piece of our application packs a punch. Those letters of recommendation can be directly uploaded to the application system. So the way that that would work is you would enter all of your letter writers' information into the AMCAS or the ACOMAS as you're filling out your application, and it'll generate an automatic email and link to them so that they're able to fill that out. You might also consider collecting your letters using Interfolio. And so Interfolio is a way for you to, again, have them upload those letters anonymously, and then you can import them into the systems. So for your letters of recommendation, as we're thinking about who those should come from, the first one that we want to make sure that we're getting is from a science faculty member. And so that science faculty member needs to be somebody who has observed you in an academic setting in their class. And the reason that I'm so specific about that is oftentimes I work with applicants who were teaching assistants or learning assistants or lab assistants, whatever your school calls them. And so even though that faculty member has observed you in that capacity, we really do need to make sure that there is a science faculty member who has observed your ability to succeed in an academically challenging scientific classroom, so that med schools, right, sort of have that reassurance that you're capable of taking on those academic challenges. There's a question in the chat about should we get letters of recommendation from a non-science professor as well? And that's one of the ones that I think is a great bonus. If you're able to get one, that's great, especially if it's somebody who, again, can speak to your academic aptitude. It's not like a hard and fast, we need it, the way that a science faculty member is. We'd love to have a letter from a physician. Ideally, if you're applying DO, we've got a letter from a DO. If you're applying MD, we've got a letter from an MD. And then supervisors, PIs on research projects, folks who have worked with you in a volunteer capacity and help to manage or coordinate you in your volunteer role, all good options. So then top tips for this section, we want to make sure that with your letters of recommendation that folks are able to highlight your experience in the competencies. So again, when we're thinking about those letters of recommendation, we want to consider what competencies can folks speak to as opposed to thinking about the number of letters that we have. We want to make sure that we're sharing our resume and our statement draft with them so that they're able to take a look at those and incorporate that into their letters of rec. And then don't be afraid to give them a little direction. As somebody who writes a lot of letters for students, I love when my students can say, like, here are the skills I feel like I developed during my work with you, right, on a research project, as a student employee, through our mentoring relationship. Could you talk about those things? So again, don't be afraid to give a little bit of direction. I'm going to try to grab a couple questions from the chat. Is it better to review the letters? You can't review the letters. They need to upload those directly. You sign like an affidavit saying that you haven't seen them. If both my undergrad and postbac have committee letters, should I complete both committee letter applications? So my institution, I've not worked in a space that does committee letters as much. I would say if they're able to do a Some schools will do like a combined committee letter, even if you've completed a degree elsewhere. So I would talk to your programs about that and see if it's possible to combine them. How do I approach asking for rec letters with a professor is not as close to because of the pandemic? I have people that can write strong letters, but I would still need one more. So this is somebody that if you're still in school, I would say like if you can start attending their office hours before the end of the semester and try to reestablish that relationship, that would be great. If we are non-traditional, is it okay to not have any letters from instructors? Yeah, I think if you're able to go back and reignite some of those relationships, that's great. But if not, that's okay. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our time together. Again, I'm going to stick around if folks have questions that they want to drop into the chat. But again, there are so many amazing events coming up this week. And before you go, we do have a giveaway winner for the med school boot camp. So our winner is Tabarak Alsud. And so Amanda says that they'll be reaching out soon with an email to tell you a little bit more about your bootcamp win. So I've got my coaching page right here if you want to go ahead and do a quick QR scan. I've also got a discount code here for 20% off your first hourly coaching order with me if you're interested. So again, I'll stick around for a quick minute. If folks have questions, happy to chat through those. Thank you so much for all of the thank yous in the chat. This is so nice to see. I'm so glad that this was helpful for folks. And again, thank you to Amanda for sharing that link in the chat. Thanks, everybody. It was great to see you here. Have a great rest of your night.